So you might be aware that not too long ago, I made a video talking about my top 10 favorite games in the Resident Evil franchise. But this series has had some real stinkers as well, and I feel like it is my destiny to talk to you about some of the bad that this franchise has put out there. So let's get started with the top 5 worst Resident Evil games. I'm putting this one on the list not because I think this is one of the worst Resident Evil games in general, but because of what it represented. Resident Evil 6 was a new low for this franchise. Between 2009 and 2012, Capcom pushed out several awful games, some of which we'll be talking about in this video. Resident Evil 6 was the last to come out before a few years of silence. A much needed silence too. Resident Evil 4 set the franchise on an action-oriented track, and Resident Evil 5 showed that this style had some cracks in it. 6 ripped those cracks wide open. The lack of ammo was not fun and intense like in the original games. It was dumb and frustrating. This game also features 7 main characters, and 4 story tracks that don't do a good job of tying together. Some parts of the game must be played a second and even third time, which gets repetitive and frustrating. Thankfully, Resident Evil 7 patched these issues up, but Resident Evil 6 will always be a stain to the franchise's name. Okay, I can't be too hard on this game. It is, after all, a Game Boy Color game. But it just begs the question, did we really need Resident Evil on the Game Boy? Resident Evil made its name from the fixed camera angles and the creepy ambiance, and the Game Boy just wasn't really capable of capturing this. Instead of just finding and shooting zombies, you play this timing minigame every time you confront a zombie. You have to press the button in sync with the lines on the bar to kill zombies. It's a witty way to get around the Game Boy limitations, but it's just not Resident Evil. The puzzles were reduced to finding keys, and saving was limited to several spots and doorways. This wasn't all bad. The story was actually pretty clever and well written, but it doesn't do enough to make up for the bad gameplay. It's kinda just a game that exists. They did a good job with what they had to work with, but this game just proves one thing. Resident Evil does not belong on the Game Boy. So this is a 3DS Resident Evil game, so I'm not expecting some incredible HD game with a captivating story. And to be honest, the game actually does look pretty good. So what's the problem? Well, there just isn't much there. It's one of those games you'll enjoy, play for an hour, and then never touch again. But admittedly, the gameplay is actually kind of fun, and the controls are smooth for a handheld shooter. So again, what's the issue? Well, the real problem is what Capcom tried to do with the game. This game autosaves after you reach a result screen, and it's impossible to delete your save data. Well, almost impossible, unless you plan on using some third-party technology to get rid of it. Now, why did Capcom do this? They didn't want people to pick this game up pre-owned. It was their way of forcing people to buy a new copy of their crappy, boring Resident Evil game. It just felt like such a money grub that I can't support it. The game itself isn't all that bad, I just hate companies that try to take away the pre-owned market with these shallow tactics. This game has tons of flaws, but let's start with the biggest. The game is a light gun shooter, and it was designed to be played with a gun attachment. In Japan and Europe, you have this option, but in North America, sorry, you're out of luck. The normal controller still works, but it is garbage. And granted, the gun add-on is still terrible, but with the normal PS1 controller, it just plays horribly. Saving in this game is another issue entirely, because, well, you can't save. At least, not in the same way you think of saving. You can only save in this game when you die, because saving will only keep your items and files. It won't save your progress, however, meaning when you quit the game, it's back to the beginning for you. So basically, don't die. And while this game isn't too challenging anyway, with the poor controls, it's easy to make one mistake and suffer for it. This game is meant for only the most hardcore of Resident Evil fans, and even for them, it's not a good game. Unless you're actively looking for bad games, steer clear. Hard to believe there's a game worse than this, but there is. And actually, there's 2 of them. Let's just stop for a second and look at the screen. This is the famous survival horror franchise Resident Evil in all its shame and humiliation. If you saw my top 10 best Resident Evil games video, you'd remember that I said Resident Evil 5 should be played in multiplayer to get the most enjoyment from an otherwise average game. Well, Operation Raccoon City has to be played multiplayer to get even an ounce of satisfaction. This game is bad, no other way around it. But let this be an honorable mention, because there is a very similar game that is so much worse. Say hello to Resident Evil Umbrella Corps. Yeah, believe it or not, this is actually a Resident Evil game, and not some stupid Call of Duty ripoff. It's so hard to look at the original Resident Evil and what it meant to the gaming community, and then see it turned into this. But it's too easy to just say that this isn't what Resident Evil should be, because this game just fails as a shooter in general. There's no story mode, just some weird single player mode with different repetitive missions. It was meant to be a multiplayer experience, but the maps are so small and bland that there's almost no replayability. The fun of multiplayer games is exploring the nooks and crannies of maps, but there's none of that here. What Capcom did here is make a rush shooter game, with no depth, and slap on the Resident Evil name to cash out. It's pathetic and shameful, and it showed just how far Resident Evil had fallen until Resident Evil 7 brought them back to relevance. And that's the video. Each of these games was included on the list for a specific reason, but let me know if you agree or disagree and how you felt about these games. Even the worst games have some charm to them, and I want to know your opinions on them. And if you have ideas for other lists and other game series you'd like to see, let me know. Thanks for watching.